Hello and welcome to the National Security Conversation. The Indian Army has lost at least one officer and two soldiers in the Galwan Valley region in a clash with the Chinese soldiers sometime yesterday. This is the first LAC, line of actual control, combat casualties since 1975. The official statement issued by the Indian Army stated, and I quote, "During the de-escalation process underway in the Galwan Valley, a violent face-off took place on Monday night with casualties. The loss of lives on the Indian side includes one officer and two soldiers." However, the Chinese PLA statement was far more aggressive. It stated, and I quote, "Indian troops violated their commitments, crossed the line of actual control, and conducted illegal activity and deliberately launched provocative attacks, triggering violent physical conflicts between the two sides, resulting in casualties. The sovereignty," the statement added, "of the Galwan Valley has always been ours." So is this the beginning of the end of the Sino-Indian rapprochement on the line of actual control? Why has the BJP government not clarified to the nation the exact nature of the standoff on the line of actual control? The government has been talking about mutual disengagement and mutual withdrawal from the Galwan area. But is that really what is taking place there? Or is there more to the story than what the government is telling us at this point of time? And now, how does India respond to this Chinese aggression? What really are our options, militarily or otherwise? To discuss the latest developments on the line of actual control, the standoff between India and China, I have with me Lieutenant General Deependra Singh Hooda, the former Northern Army commander of the Indian Army. So welcome to the National Security Conversation, General Hooda.
Thank you very much.
The report at this point of time indicate that the Indian Army has lost at least one officer and two soldiers in the Galwan Valley region during a clash with the Chinese soldiers sometime yesterday. So this is perhaps the first LAC combat casualties that India is suffering since 1975. So how do you view this? Is this the end of the so-called Sino-Indian rapprochement on the line of actual control?
So Happymon, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to this dialogue. And it comes at an unfortunate time when we've had these three casualties along the LAC. Let me just say it's very, very serious. As you are saying, it's the first time that we've had this kind of incident along the line of actual control after 1975. We've actually had deaths because of clash between the two armies. I think it also requires greater seriousness because it didn't just happen because of a sudden border clash. It comes at a time when the two countries and the two armies are already locked in a standoff, and we are trying to look and find ways to resolve the current standoff that is happening. And so when you have these kind of incidents taking place, violent clashes between the two sides, I think it hugely complicates how we are going to be able to resolve this issue. And finally, I think we need to start looking at our border protocols. I've been saying this, so I won't say it's the end of the rapprochement, but I think it's time that we start looking at our border protocols to see are they succeeding or they are not succeeding, and how these kind of incidents can be avoided.
Right, General Hooda, you termed it as very serious. The various words that have been used in the recent past are standoff, incursions, encroachment, land grab. What really is it? What really is happening in your understanding?
My understanding, what is happening is the Chinese have come well prepared to create a serious incident on the borders. I don't think it's merely related to we want to capture 2 kilometers here or 1 kilometer here. I mean, I don't see the PLA taking such risks. And I say it's a risky situation because, you're going to have two armies facing off each other in incidents like this. There's obviously some intention with the aim of pressurizing India, with the aim of, I would say, even coercing India. What exactly is the ultimate intent and what their demands are, we don't know. So I don't think we can compare it to, past incidents where we use terms like incursion or transgressions of the LAC. I think it's nothing like that. It's a much more serious incident.
So if it's a much more serious incident, let me put it to you this way. Is the Chinese People's Liberation Army in possession of the land on the Indian side of the line of actual control, or which was traditionally considered to be the Indian side of the line of actual control at this point of time, or not? I know it's a blunt question, but I think it's for the viewers, it may be useful for them to understand, get a sense of the actual picture on the ground.
Yeah. So from what we know, and what we know is what we are seeing from various satellite imagery, etc. Because that is what gives you the most clear picture. And from that, at least in the north bank of Pengongso, it is clear that the Chinese are on what we consider our side of the line of actual control. So that much is clear. Now, I know this area was considered somewhat disputed between Finger 4 and Finger 8. And I'm sure your viewers will be familiar with both these terms because they've been talked about a lot. But there was a clear understanding on both sides that there will be no physical occupation of the area. So while patrols would come and they would go back, and our patrols would also go up to Finger 8 and come back, there was a very, very clear understanding nobody will physically occupy this area. And that's where I think the Chinese have come and they have sat in this area in what we consider our territory. That much is clear.
Right, but the government of India has been referring to mutual disengagement and mutual withdrawal from the Galwan area. So is that what is really taking place? Because it is my understanding, correct me generally if I'm wrong, that the Galwan has been in the Indian possession since 1962, Galwan area. So if it has been in the Indian possession, why do we refer to it as mutual disengagement and mutual withdrawal? The Chinese PLA has to withdraw, right?
My understanding of this is that while yes, the LAC in the Galwan area, I think there will be no dispute on either side as to where exactly it lies. But there were no real, I would say, posts which were very close to the LAC in that area, or that whole valley was physically occupied, by putting our troops there permanently. So we would go and patrol in that area, and then we would come back, and similarly the Chinese would come patrol and go back up to a mutually accepted point. Now, when two sides are physically sort of facing off each other, I don't know, Happymon, whether it's 1 kilometer our side or 2 kilometers our side, or is it all bang along the LAC. But the fact is, if you have hundreds of soldiers facing off each other, and if times are tense, then you could have incidents which go out of hand, which is exactly what has happened in the Galwan River. And therefore, it is always better that both sides disengage. And when you're separated by 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers from each other, then the chance of anything going out of hand is not there. And that in somehow will set the stage. If everything remains calm, there is no violence, that I think will set the stage for the talks and to resolve issues.
So just to understand that and put that in perspective, you're saying that the disengagement and the mutual withdrawal have to be a precursor to the Chinese withdrawal from the land that they have encroached on at this point of time on the Indian side of the LAC. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that, Happymon. What I'm saying is, and that's the sense I get from the various statements that are being given out by the military, that in areas north of Pengong, where the apparently the standoff is taking place, and the places we are hearing about is hot springs and areas like PP 15, 16, 17, and the Galwan area. These were areas where traditionally the LAC has not been disputed. And therefore, perhaps it was easier to find a solution in these areas. And therefore, they said, and as the chief also said, let's start the disengagement from the northern areas where there are no disputes, and then come to the more contentious area of Pangong Tso, where traditionally there have been differences in opinion. So I think that was the approach that they were attempting to take, that areas where there are no major disagreements, let's disengage from those areas and then come to and discuss about Pangong Tso.
Right. General Hooda, you made a very interesting point earlier on, and that is the current standoff is unlike any of the previous standoffs between the two sides on the LAC. If you could tell me, you were still in service in 2013. What is the difference between what is happening now and say what happened in Depsang in 2013?
So not only Depsang, so let me talk about Depsang, and then I was there when Tumor happened in 2014 also. You see, these were very localized incidents. Even when we look at Doklam, which was a 73-day standoff, it was an incident that was localized to Doklam. The trigger was also, I would say, a local situation. So in Tumor, for example, they wanted to build a road into what we considered as our territory, and they were stopped. Similarly, at Doklam, they wanted to build a road, and we thought that they should not be coming into that area, and so we stopped their construction of the road. In Depsang in 2013, they planted a tent. They had only 20-30 people, so in numbers it was a very small sort of incident. They wanted a quid pro quo in some area, for us to remove some construction of ours in some area. We were very clear on both sides on what the Chinese wanted, what we wanted. This time it's not a local incident at all. They've come in 5-6 places. They've come in very large numbers. They've come in with a fair amount of preparation. I have not seen the levels of violence that accompanied the initial incursions, if you may call them, and then what has happened yesterday. So that's why, to compare it with previous incidents, I think we would be, going completely wrong. The Chinese intentions are very opaque. I don't know what they are looking at, and the force with which they have come is completely unprecedented.
That's really my next question. I mean, you've been the Northern Army commander. You know that you've dealt with the Chinese officials on the LAC. So knowing the history of it, knowing how India and China have been dealing with each other, and I was reading through your national security document also, where you mentioned a lot about the Chinese, not just as a challenge, strategic challenge, but also as an opportunity, as it were. So looking at it from that point of view, what, in your opinion, is the rationale that the Chinese are going with in terms of this particular aggression? Is that a and as you correctly pointed out, this is not a localized sort of a standoff. This is a much larger thing. So what could be the potential rationale in your mind?
See, again, there is a lot of speculation about, is it linked to Kashmir? Is it merely linked to, the situation maybe along the LAC has been deteriorating over a period of time? Is it linked to our relations with America? Is it linked to internal situations that are happening in China, and therefore an attempt to sort of externalize the situation to, get attention, domestic attention away? We can only speculate, Happymon. What is clear, as I said earlier, is that they are certainly putting pressure on India. And therefore, what is the reason for this? When they start talking diplomatically, I guess when they start saying this is what we want as preconditions for the situation to ease off, I think that's the time we'll get greater clarity about, why at this time and what exactly do they want.
Right. Let me put that question differently. let's not look at the larger political objective or the diversionary tactic that the Chinese may be using by doing what they're doing at this point of time. But in the larger Jammu and Kashmir region, or in the Ladakh, Eastern Ladakh region, you have the issue of CPEC, you have the reports about Chinese soldiers present in POK, Siachen Glacier. So in that particular region, what, from a Chinese strategic point of view, would this kind of an operation or similar operations of this kind in future could potentially give them from a strategic point of view?
So I think their idea is always to keep the LAC sort of active, and in the past they have used this as a pressure point on India. When they feel that they need to put some pressure on India, you will always find it happening on the LAC. There's some incident will get triggered from their side, and in some ways, telling India that here is where is your weakness and where we can apply pressure on you. Obviously, while Ladakh is so much, if you actually look at the overall incursions, I think about 60 to 70% are actually happening in Ladakh, and the rest are happening, say in the eastern sector or in the central sector. That's because Jammu Kashmir is frankly, a strategic state. You have the LC, you have the LAC, as you rightly pointed out. You have the CPEC passing through Pak-occupied Kashmir. CPEC is something that we have been objecting to constantly in the past. You could say there was some provocation, when we published a map of Ladakh and the Chinese objected to it. So I think it's a pressure point. The Ladakh LST and Jammu Kashmir is certainly a pressure point, for China, which they think they can apply on India when they want.
General Hooda, look at it this way: from a broader strategic point of view, again, are we looking at three kinds of pressure on India at this point of time? You have the Pakistani side provoking firing on the line of control. The infiltrations are on the rise. You have China doing what it is doing on the LAC, and then you have Nepal engaging in a certain kind of cartographic aggression, as it were. So if you were in the government, if you were to tell the government, maybe you should not open too many fronts at the same time, do you think that the BJP-led government has perhaps opened too many fronts at this point of time? Say, I'm referring to the statement the Home Minister of India made in the Indian Parliament about Aksai Chin. He made this very clear that Aksai Chin belongs to Jammu and Kashmir, belongs to India. So is it a smart strategy to open so many fronts at the same time?
Yeah, so I agree with you, Happymon. I think we should have been a little more careful about how we look at our neighbors and how we deal with our external sort of policy. I know the External Affairs Minister did try and calm down some of the damage that was done by saying, as far as the situation along the borders is concerned, nothing has changed. And I think similarly, we could have been a little more sensitive about Nepalese concerns. The Kala Pani issue is not new. It's been it's been going on for some time, and the Nepalese Prime Minister has flagged it in the past. So maybe we should have been a little more sensitive also in that place to try and see if this doesn't escalate unnecessarily. Not that there is any sort of military dimension to it, but having neighbors and having problems with neighbors. Obviously, people are saying that China is behind this whole Nepal move. Could well be, if not in the minimum, China will at least try and exploit our differences with our neighbors. So for sure, I think we need to start looking at how we need to deal with our neighborhood, because right now things are looking quite challenging.
Interestingly, the new map released by the Nepalese, especially including the Lipu Lake area, some of this is pretty close to Tibet, for instance. So this is, and the fact that India is so close to Tibet is perhaps a pressure point for China. So would it be conspiratorial, therefore, to suggest that, as the army chief pointed out the other day, that the Nepalese are probably doing it at the behest of somebody else, meaning China here, because the Chinese probably have a certain sensitivity regarding the road that India built and the defense ministry inaugurated the other day, which is pretty close to Tibet.
I'm not sure, upon that everything that the Nepalese do is at the behest of the Chinese. I mean, they have their own national interests. They have a prime minister who's under pressure and would also try and play the sort of ultra nationalism card, in order to consolidate his position. As far as the road to Lipu Lake is concerned, again, this road has been it was a foot track. I mean, I was there for 43 years ago, 1976. I was posted there, and we have patrolled up to Lipu Lake. The road was there. This was the Kailash Mansarovar route on which people used to trek, and so the same alignment has got converted into a road. The Chinese have never had any issues with this. In fact, Lipu Lake is a trading point between India and China. So I don't think everything that Nepal does is at China's behest. But as I said earlier, certainly if two neighbors don't have the best of relationships, the third one is going to try and exploit the differences.
But General, there is a lot of criticism today about the fact that the government of India is pretty mum about what is happening on the LAC. It's not really divulging the facts to the general public. This is a democracy, and the argument goes that the people have a right to know. But you've been on the ground. You've been the army commander. What would you say to that sort of a criticism? Is the government right in not divulging the facts? In a democracy, do the people have a right to know the facts?
So, Happymon, let me just answer it this way. I think there are certain aspects which are sensitive, particularly when negotiations are going on, and what sort of talks are taking place. And those things obviously need to be kept, secretive, so that you don't have a discussion, debate in the media about your strategies and how you need to deal with it. But I think a little more clarity about what the situation on ground is. Factual issues can be brought out, because in the absence of that, there has been so much speculation about whether the Chinese are in our area or they're not in our area, what numbers have they come in, what has actually happened. There has been a lot of unnecessary fuzzy debate about the LAC, and some talk about gray zones. There's no such thing as gray zones, when borders are concerned.
Right.
So I think there they could have been, a little more upfront. That would have stopped all kind of speculation from taking place. But obviously, everything cannot be in the open domain when you are discussing and discussing issues with another country. My second thing is, I don't know, and this is my personal sense, the tone that is being adopted by us is a little defensive, and I think that may not be the right strategy when dealing with China. So we have adopted a very defensive tone. Even if you look at the last statement on this, when the officer and these two Jawans were martyred, our statement was that this happened during the de-escalation, that violence broke out. Look at the Chinese statement. They said Indians have come and attacked us across the border.
Exactly.
So I think we just can't become too defensive on this.
So that takes me to my next question. So how do we respond to this kind of a behavior from the Chinese side? If this is, as you put it, an unprecedented development, and if this is going to repeat in future, or if the Chinese are not amenable to reason about withdrawing from the occupied territories, how do we respond to this kind of a challenge from the Chinese side? What are the options that we have on the table?
So I'm saying the first thing is, I think the government needs to clearly, convey the red line and what it wants from the Chinese. I think the second thing is, this kind of behavior that is happening among the soldiers of the two armies, violence and pushing, shoving, stone pelting. This needs to stop completely. And Happymon, let me tell you, and it's not because I have commanded troops from the Indian Army I'm saying this. This whole business of stone pelting, coming with rods and sticks, this is Chinese behavior that we are seeing recently, and this completely needs to stop.
I understand that point. What I'm trying to ask is that what do you think that India has enough sufficient military options, if necessary, on the table to push back against Chinese aggression?
I think there are, Happymon, although I would say let's keep them off the table for now. Absolutely. And see if things can happen diplomatically, politically. Along the border in Ladakh, the Indian Army has fairly strong presence along the LAC. In fact, let me tell you, if you look at the comparative deployment on both sides, the Indian Army deployment is much stronger as compared to the Chinese side. It's a mountainous terrain. Every inch is not held. There are areas, where we can do a quid pro quo and go into some areas if required. It's not as if that capability does not exist. If push comes to shove, and there needs to be, a physical pushing out of the Chinese from what we consider our disputed areas, even that is a possibility. Sure, nobody wants to sort of go down that route for now, but there are many options that are available for the Indian Army to respond if required in a military fashion.
General Hooda, you wrote the other day for a newspaper that if a conventional conflict were to take place today, it would be a realistic assessment that India would hold its own and may even enjoy an edge in the air and maritime domain. However, as we look at the future, the two sobering realities confront us. First, the balance of conventional forces is speedily shifting in China's favor. And second, China's military capability development is highly focused while India is yet to articulate a national defense strategy. Are you saying that it won't be easy for India to push back the Chinese in a conventional situation?
See, as we go forward, as I said today, frankly, purely looking at conventional war fighting capability, we are fairly balanced and fairly sort of well placed against PLA, both on land, at sea, and even in the aerial domain. As we go forward.
Just to butt in, one of my colleagues at JNU, Professor Rajesh Rajagopalan, actually wrote a long paper for the Carnegie the other day, and some time ago, he actually does a bean counting, and he says China actually has slightly fewer ground forces than India. However, China enjoys critical terrain advantages along the Sino-Indian border. Meanwhile, China fields twice as many modern combat aircraft as India and nearly 3 times as many major surface combat vessels and submarines. That sounds pretty alarming to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, let me just quickly put this in context. One is to say that the Chinese enjoy ground advantage everywhere along the LAC is not completely true, because the watershed in many places is being held by the Indian Army. And secondly, the number of troops that are deployed, he also says is, on our side is higher. And therefore, the other difficulty of launching large-scale attacks, across mountain heights of 13,000, 14,000 feet, what forces can you apply? The logistics that is required is difficult. In terms of aircraft, yes, if you just count the numbers, where would they operate from? So they're operating from high-altitude airfields in Tibet.
Right.
And that limits their capability, of payloads, etc. And the number of airfields that are available in Tibet for their aircraft to take off, while we take off from the planes. So a lot of the edge that they have, sort of reduces. Navy, yes, in pure numbers, the number of battleships they have is more than that of the US Navy. But again, for those ships to transit, through the Malacca Straits, come in to logistically sustain in the Indian Ocean would be a little difficult. So I'm saying for now, it isn't as if they have tremendous advantage. As we go forward, this capability gap I see growing tremendously. So
Right.
there
Yeah.
was I think a European Union study which looked at defense budget, and by 2030 they looked at Indian defense budget going to about over $200 billion. But in contrast, the Chinese budget was more than $700 billion. So that's one part, that capability gap is growing. And the second is, as I said, their restructuring is extremely focused. So you look at how they've reformed the theater commands, the whole CMC has got restructured, joint operation headquarters have got set up, command control has got improved, cyber, space, rocket force, the kind of modernization that they're doing. On our side, unfortunately, we just seem to be too stuck on the defense budget. So our reform and restructuring is how to manage with the existing budget. And therefore, rather than going as per a capability development plan, which is funded by the government. So if you have a capability development plan that the government agrees to and says, yes, this is the kind of capabilities that the military needs, then they provide the funds for it. In our case, it is the ad hoc allocation of funds, and then whatever is there, please do what you can out of it. I think that's not the way to develop capabilities. And so that's where I feel there is a major mismatch.
Right. Let me put it this way. Given the fact that both the states are nuclear capable, or nuclear weapon capable states, a nuclear war, of course, an all-out war is unlikely. An all-out conventional war is also unlikely, given the economic stakes and other aspects. So as far as tactical situations of this kind are concerned, the force ratio on the ground is not necessarily disadvantages to India. That's what you're telling our viewers, right?
Yeah, true.
All right. Generally, you wrote in the national security strategy document that you had prepared that the rise of China and its growing assertiveness poses the most significant long-term challenge to India. An unsettled border provides China the opportunity for selective provocation at a time of their choosing. That seems to be very prophetic, what you wrote a few years ago, in fact, just 2 years ago. So how do you view this statement, looking at what's happening on the LSE at this point of time?
I think what has happened, Happymon, is that this whole coronavirus and this geopolitical churning that is happening has actually, in some ways, speeded up the India-China rivalry. So you find China becoming much more assertive in all the areas. You look at South China Sea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Australia, Philippines, Indonesia, and also along the India-China border. So I think our biggest challenge going forward will be how are we going to manage the rise of both India and China peacefully. And I think it's going to be extremely challenging, because China will not want a strong India in its neighbor, and it will do everything that it can to try and keep India engaged elsewhere or to keep India down. That's a reality. We might say it would be nice to have people of India and China living in peace and harmony going forward. I don't think it will happen. We will see great strategic competition.
General Hooda, you were the Northern Army commander, and you've dealt with both China and Pakistan in that capacity. So, from a strategic point of view, if you were to look at these two adversaries, which one do you think is a bigger challenge, or a long-term adversary, or a challenge, as it were?
Undoubtedly, China. I mean, there is no doubt. Unfortunately, a lot of our attention remains focused on Pakistan, which is unfortunate. Although of late there has been an understanding, I think that more and more China is going to be the big challenge. I think the problem is we are sort of not openly coming out also and saying it. I don't know. We are maybe too sensitive about the message we are sending to China. we are also a big country, and I think we need to make our intentions clear. And if we feel that China is a strategic rival, and that there are things that China is doing which we are not happy about, I think we should be openly sort of coming out and saying this. That's possibly the best way that an honest engagement can take place. You look at some of the readings, of China about India, and they feel India is no match to China. And that we should be kept in our place and things like that. I think we need to be a little more, should I say, assertive while dealing with China.
But being defensive is not going to help us in the longer run. That's what I'm saying.
No.
Just have to go back to my earlier point, and that you did respond that between Pakistan and China, the bigger threat, of course, as you said, is China. But of course, there is a strategic partnership between these two countries, and they sort of come at India as part of an alliance. So from a smart strategy point of view, is it not a good idea to break that alliance at some level by, say, trying to resolve some of our outstanding issues with the Pakistani side? Whatever those issues may be, if that is a threat of a lower order, settle the disputes and issues with that challenge, with that adversary, and then move on to the bigger issue, which is going to last for the next decade, for instance.
So I agree with you, Happymon. I'm a great believer that we can't stop talking to Pakistan. It's our neighbor. I know we have major problems regarding terrorism and other issues with them, but I think not talking is not the answer. So we need to sit down with them, talk to them. Yes, it can be. The progress of talks can be based on results. That if you see some results, then let us move forward. So let's lay down what our achievements are, what results we want out of these talks. Convey that to Pakistan, and see how we can move forward with Pakistan and solve some of those issues, so that, as you're saying rightly, we can focus on our bigger challenger, which is China.
General Hooda, wonderful talking to you. What a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Dr. Jacob. Thank you so much.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.